Hey everyone, and welcome. If you're a Class 10 student, you already know that Chapter 7, How Do Organisms Reproduce, is a really big deal for your board exams. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down every single key concept from your NCERT textbook and make it super simple and easy to lock in. Ready? Let's dive in.
We're going to follow the chapter's flow exactly. First up, we'll get into the absolute basics, the blueprint of life, DNA. Then, we'll see how organisms can reproduce all by themselves, before jumping into how it works with a partner. After that, it's all about human reproduction. And we'll wrap things up with a super important topic, our health and our choices.
All right, to really understand reproduction, we have to start with the most basic question of all.
Think about it for a second. Things like nutrition or breathing, well, you need those to stay alive. But reproduction? It doesn't help an individual organism survive, and it uses a ton of energy. So why do it? Well, it all comes down to keeping the species going. It's not about just one organism surviving, it's about the survival of the whole group.
And at the absolute core of this whole process is the blueprint for life itself, DNA. It's packed into the chromosomes inside a cell's nucleus, and it holds all the instructions for building an organism. So it makes sense that the most fundamental step in any kind of reproduction is making a copy of that DNA.
But here is where it gets really interesting. That copying process? It's never 100% perfect. Tiny little changes, what we call variations, always find their way in. Now, you might think an error is a bad thing, but in this case, it's absolutely crucial. A population where everyone's a perfect clone is super vulnerable. But a population with differences, well, it has a much better shot at surviving when things in the environment change. This variation is literally the engine that drives evolution.
Okay, now that we've got the whole DNA copying thing down, let's look at the simplest way organisms reproduce, when just one single parent creates a whole new generation all on its own. This is what we call asexual reproduction. For a lot of single-celled organisms, reproduction is basically just cell division, or what we call fission. You take an amoeba, for example. The cell just splits into two new separate individuals. Simple as that. That's called binary fission. But hold on, it's not always just a simple split. An organism like Leishmania has to divide along a very specific line because of its structure. And then you have the malaria parasite, Plasmodium, which does something incredible. It goes through multiple fission, splitting into tons of daughter cells all at the same time. And then there are organisms like Spirogyra that use fragmentation. They just break apart, and each little piece grows into a whole new organism.
Some multicellular organisms have this almost superpower-like ability called regeneration. If you were to cut a planaria into pieces, each and every piece can grow back into a complete new organism. Now, this isn't their main way of reproducing, but it just shows you how powerful their specialized cells are.
A pretty similar process is budding. In something like a hydra, a little outgrowth, or a bud, starts to form on the parent's body. It just keeps growing into a tiny little individual, and once it's mature enough, it just pops off and starts a life of its own.
And plants? Oh, they are masters of asexual reproduction. With vegetative propagation, a whole new plant can grow from just a piece of a root, a stem like you see with a potato, or even a leaf like in Bryophyllum. And fungi, like the mold you see on bread, Rhizopus, they use spores. These tiny spores get released and can grow into a new fungus as soon as they land on a nice moist surface.
So, you might be thinking, with all these pretty effective solo methods, why in the world did a much more complex system involving two parents, sexual reproduction, ever even come about?
Well, the answer comes right back to that key word, variation. When you combine DNA from two different individuals, you dramatically speed up the creation of new traits. You can think of it like this. Asexual reproduction creates variations slowly, one small change at a time. But sexual reproduction, it shuffles the entire genetic deck with every single new generation. This creates all sorts of new combinations and gives a species a massive advantage in adapting to a constantly changing world.
So in flowering plants, the flower is where all the action happens. You've got the stamen, that's the male part, and it produces pollen. And right there in the middle, you have the pistil, which is the female part. This is where you'll find the ovary, which holds the ovules, and tucked inside those are the all-important egg cells. So here's how it all goes down. First, you have pollination. That's when pollen gets from the stamen to the stigma. Then, a tiny tube starts growing from that pollen grain all the way down into the ovary. The male germ cell travels down this tube and fuses with the female egg cell,
And that, right there, is fertilization. The new cell, called a zygote, then starts developing into an embryo, which is kept safe inside a seed.
Now, these same basic principles of sexual reproduction, combining genetic material from two parents, they apply to us humans too. So let's shift gears and look at how this whole process works in our own species.
This journey for us really kicks off during our teenage years, in a period of change called puberty, and it brings on a whole bunch of changes. Some are common for both boys and girls, like new hair growth, and then there's specific changes, like breast development for girls and voices cracking for boys.
The male reproductive system is basically built to do two things: produce and deliver sperm. The testes are kind of like the factories where sperm are made. From there, the sperm travel through a tube called the vas deferens. Along the way, glands like the prostate and seminal vesicles add fluids, which gives the sperm nutrition and helps them move.
Now, the female reproductive system is designed to produce eggs, but it also has the incredible job of nurturing a developing embryo. Eggs are made in the ovaries. About one egg is released each month, and it travels into the fallopian tube, which is usually where fertilization happens.
So during intercourse, sperm start their journey towards the fallopian tube. If an egg is there, one sperm might fertilize it, creating a single cell called a zygote. This zygote starts dividing like crazy, becoming an embryo, which then travels to the uterus and implants itself in the wall. This is where a truly amazing organ called the placenta develops. It connects the embryo to the mother, delivering all the oxygen and food it needs to grow for the next 9 months or so, until a baby is ready to be born.
But what happens if that egg doesn't get fertilized? Well, every month, the uterus prepares for a potential pregnancy. It builds up this thick lining that's rich in blood and nutrients. If no fertilized egg shows up, that lining isn't needed anymore. So the body breaks it down and it's shed from the body. This monthly cycle is called menstruation.
And understanding all of this biology is so incredibly important because it empowers us. It allows us to make responsible and informed choices when it comes to our reproductive health.
For anyone who wants to prevent a pregnancy, there are a bunch of different contraceptive methods, and they work in different ways. You've got mechanical barriers, like condoms, that physically stop the sperm from reaching the egg. Then there are hormonal methods, like birth control pills, which actually stop the ovaries from releasing an egg in the first place. And finally, there are permanent surgical options, like a vasectomy for men or a tubectomy for women, which completely block the path for sperm or eggs.
And that brings us to our final slide with a really big, thought-provoking question taken straight from your textbook. It asks us to connect this biology to the world around us. So, we know a growing population can make it tough to raise everyone's standard of living. But is population size the only reason for poor living standards? Or is the unequal distribution of resources in our society a much bigger factor? It's a question that goes beyond biology and really leaves us with something important to think about.